One of the downsides of having a strong industrial base is the effect it has on pollution, and the East Midlands is responsible, believe it or not, for the third highest CO2 emissions in the country. One of our politicians, though, reckons that's not a problem. UKIP MEP Roger Helmer thinks even if climate change is happening, it's being caused by nature, not man. So can anything change his mind? He's the MEP who's a sceptic on climate change. They're the scientists who are convinced it's a major threat to mankind.
We should tell Brussels we're going to keep our coal-fired power stations. And we should repeal the 2008 Climate Change Act.
Roger Helmer gets a standing ovation from the UKIP conference for his views on global warming. But what kind of reception will he get from the scientists at Leicester University's brand new Centre for Studying Climate Change?
Hi, I'm Roger Helmer. How do you do?
The MEP accepts that global warming may be happening, but believes it's part of a natural pattern of warming and cooling. Today he's meeting three scientists convinced that it's our carbon emissions that are causing the problems. Roger's shown their evidence, but he's come armed with his own facts too.
In 15 years, you can see there's a bit of variation, but there's no trend. There's no long-term increase over 15 years.
Well, you're right in the sense that in the last 15 years, there wasn't any measurable climate change if you just look at that period. But if you look at the last 150 years, since humans started releasing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, then we do see a quite significant increase in temperatures globally.
One by one, the scientists take on the MEP.
We're living in a little plateau of really quite extraordinary stability. And what we are threatening to do at the moment is to push the system in ways we still don't quite understand.
If you look at the long-term deep time record, you find that there are widely varying levels of CO2, and you don't seem to see any close relationship.
Well, I would disagree with that, Roger. There are lots of instances we see in deep time where carbon dioxide is really fundamentally controlling climate.
It's a cordial meeting, but the stakes could hardly be higher. If the scientists are right, urgent action needs to be taken now. If Roger Helmer's right, we're spending billions on a problem which doesn't exist. So, has the meeting led to agreement?
It's great he's taken a keen interest in this, but we would have, I think, to sit down with him over several cups of tea, or even, as you suggested before, a pint of beer, to really try and work through the kind of evidence that we and other people have gone through.
I've got great respect for the scientists that we've met at Leicester University, but I've met and worked with other highly qualified scientists who take a quite different view. What we're dealing here with is highly disputed, highly speculative science, and on the basis of this highly speculative science, we are spending literally hundreds of billions of pounds, unimaginable amounts of money, on a problem that may not be a problem.
The evidence for climate change is so overwhelming that if he still doubts it, he will not be convinced just by meeting us.
For the scientists, it's been a chance to put what they see as an urgent case to a politician. For Roger Helmer, it's confirmed his view that the scientists have got it wrong. It could be a long time before the two sides see eye to eye. Indeed. Well, Councillor Richard Mallender from Rushcliffe Borough Council is chair of Nottingham Green Party. What do you make of that?
I think Roger's always tremendous good value, but he could argue all day about how many angels there are dancing on the head of a pin, and he's never going to be convinced on climate change.
Is it disappointing when you see how strongly the scientists were trying to persuade him?
I don't think that they will ever be able to persuade him. No matter how many cups of tea they get through or how many beers, they will never persuade Roger on this. It's one of these things. So there's a saying, isn't there? We are armed only with peer-reviewed science. And these guys have spent their life studying this. There are thousands of scientists all over the world who've come to pretty much the same conclusions. It's degree of climate change that's caused by people looking at not whether or not it's happening or not.
But, Pauline, you said you were going to be the greenest government ever, but this coalition seems to be split on the issue. One minute you're saying there's going to be wind farms, one minute there's not.
Well,
I
think wind farms are quite questionable because very often if you drive past them, they're not moving. So they're a big intrusion into the landscape. But there are other things that we can do, and yes, we are moving on green issues.
There are other things you can do, but you should be making the message clearer as well, shouldn't you?
Well, maybe we should be, but we should be really trying to persuade people to insulate their houses, and we've got the Green Deal, which is putting a lot of money into that. We are looking at alternative technologies, and we are going to be spreading the risk really on the technologies so that we've got plenty of different options. But the key thing is people need to take some action themselves and insulate their houses and make sure.
We heard how bad we are for CO2 emissions in the East Midlands. And we've just been hearing, though, the good news, Chris, about Toyota and Rolls-Royce. But, of course, that can be bad news for the environment. Can you actually square the two?
Yes, I think you can, and I don't think it is bad news for the environment. Look, Rolls-Royce and indeed Toyota are leading the way in green technologies and more fuel-efficient cars, more fuel-efficient aero engines. We can't live in a bubble. It's absolutely vital, I think, that we support our manufacturing industry. But as far as this government being the greenest government ever, well, you could have fooled me. I mean, the Green Deal, yes, it's a step in the right direction, but it's not really fit for purpose. It won't deal with the poorest households. I think they're very unlikely to actually take up the Green Deal. They're the ones that need it most. They've also undermined the feed-in tariff system that Labour introduced, and they haven't gone ahead with the carbon capture and storage
they certainly haven't.
Demonstration project Labour were planning for.
Here.
The government agreed grudgingly to do one, and now they aren't even going ahead with that. If we're going to meet our climate change obligations as set out in the Climate Change Act that Labour was responsible for introducing, the government is really going to have to up its game.
Pauline, you come in there.
Well, Chris, as ever, has to rant and have bad news. We are looking and trying to work really hard with people to make sure that they can insulate their houses. There's a huge amount of money going into it, and that will make a big difference. But also Rolls-Royce and Toyota are doing a lot for the local environment because they've built new buildings, and Rolls-Royce particularly has invested billions of pounds here, and they are making sure that they're energy efficient buildings to do the work in them.
What do you make of the way these two parties are tackling this issue? I mean, obviously there is
I just don't think they're getting to grips with this seriously. I mean, we do absolutely need to insulate homes. We do need jobs for the area. People are quite right about that. But we're talking about creating green jobs and building that green infrastructure for the economy. And I'm sorry, but encouraging more and more aerospace manufacture is not the way to go. However good that is, what we need to do is fundamentally structure away from, for example, short-haul flights. And we see certainly the government now, the Conservatives.
What about HS2?
We see the Conservatives angling towards wanting to increase the amount of aviation, going towards building a third runway at Heathrow or elsewhere in the southeast.
And
high speed 2.
We have to look at investment. We cannot stop.
You can, but it's the wrong kind of investment. High Speed 2, for example, High Speed 2, for example, is a system that is going to create
flights.
High Speed 2, as currently devised by the government and supported by Labour, will have a large carbon footprint simply because of the speed that you intend to run the train at. If you ran it as a slower network, not as slow train as the ones going out, but if you ran it as a slower network,
what about other countries where they have fast trains? We need those fast trains to get people around the country and stop them using planes locally. But we are looking at another place to put a terminal, simply because we need people to fly to this country. Otherwise, we won't have the good jobs like for Rolls-Royce and Bombardier.
You don't need to fly people. You can use teleconferencing, as we have a perfect example in the studio.
Well,
here.
it doesn't work.
I'm glad you think it's so perfect in the studio, but not so perfect maybe outside of the studio.
No.
Richard Mallender, thank you very much indeed for joining me in the studio.